Overall, Rick and Morty has been a successful show, and its success has a lot to do with its wacky but interesting episodes. And while most fans can binge-watch Rick and Morty from beginning to end, the show's creator has confessed that there are 2 episodes in particular which he doesn't like. Dan Harmon, a co-creator of Rick and Morty, rarely minces words when expressing his ideas. He didn't hold back when naming the 2 Rick and Morty episodes he finds particularly lacking. To be honest, Rick and Morty has never quite been able to match the originality of its early seasons in terms of novelty. Although, there have been some outstanding episodes in more recent seasons, such as the outstanding The Vat of Acid episode from Season 4.
I'd say we've invented a little honesty today. How about you? I don't deserve this. I was just having fun.
But overall, the first few seasons of Rick and Morty feel like the program's pinnacle. Who knows why the show seemed to lose its spark as it progressed? Was it writer's block? Or did the makers just become lazy creatively? Anyway, in the first 2 years, there were non-stop hits like Total Recall, which was chock full of Easter eggs, and of course, Pickle Rick. These were the good old days of Rick and Morty, and Dan Harmon himself acknowledges this. During a sit-down with Entertainment Weekly in 2017, the show's creator spoke extensively about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Rick and Morty. Harmon stated that the episodes he enjoyed best were also the ones that received the most positive feedback from the fans. Even fans will agree that the Season 1 episodes Pickle Rick and Rick Potion Number 9 are among the show's finest. The fact that it jumped every shark imaginable not only confirmed his belief that the latter was a really fantastic episode on its own, but it also served as a representation of the pulse of Rick and Morty in its best moments. But as good as the early days were for Rick and Morty, Harmon doesn't particularly like a few of the early episodes of the show. In fact, the 7th episode of the first season, Raising Gazorpazorp, is one of his worst Rick and Morty episodes ever.
I lost the chance to be careful, Rick. I'm a father now. You know, it's time for me to be responsible. Isn't that right? Don't name it Morty.
According to Harmon, this particular episode is the poorest episode of Season 1 of Rick and Morty. And going by how lackluster fan reception was, you can say Harmon was right. In this episode, Morty has a robot child who he calls Morty Jr. By the way, those who haven't seen the show might be shocked to hear that a human can have a robot baby. That's Rick and Morty for you. Anyway, Morty is not in the least prepared to be a parent, and this leads to more mayhem than he is prepared for. Now, there are many things to love about the episode Raising Gazorpazorp, but Harmon rated it as his least favorite episode. Not that he found anything particularly wrong with it, it's just that the feedback from the fans isn't what he had wished for. In his interview with Entertainment Weekly, he had this to say: "I was so proud while I was writing it, but when I read people's comments on how the episode felt stale, I was disappointed immediately." He continued by saying, "Now that I hate it, I want it to burn to death." The question now is, why did the fans hate this episode so much? It appears the episode's focus on gender politics is to blame for fan disapproval. And being that Harmon is the one who penned the much-hated episode, you can understand why he's mad at himself and the episode. That's that. So, which is the other Rick and Morty episode Dan Harmon hates? It's Vindicators 3: The Return of Worldender, of course. This is the 4th episode of Season 3, and it seems it's the one Harmon hates the most. This episode would serve as definitive evidence that Rick and Morty are anti-superheroes. In this Season 3 adventure, the titular couple teams up with some extraterrestrial heroes, who strongly resemble the Guardians of the Galaxy as they battle an old foe. Of course, the plot is much more complicated than this description suggests, and it actually plays more like a grisly Saw sequel. The superhero squad is voiced by some excellent guest performers, including Christian Slater, Gillian Jacobs, and the late, great Lance Reddick. Interestingly, the Vindicators themselves had their own spin-off, but all of this did not stop Harmon from referring to it as Rick and Morty's worst episode on the Harmontown podcast. He had this to say about the episode: "It's my fault that this will go down as the worst Rick and Morty episode ever." Surprisingly, Harmon didn't go into detail about why he thought Vindicators 3 would be the worst episode, at least not at that time. The plot of this trip is a little shoddy, and it is clear from the start that the Vindicators themselves are kind of awful. Perhaps Harmon's standing has deteriorated in light of poorly received episodes like Rick Dependence Spray, which was also hated by fans. Harmon once said, "I don't care how hard I worked on an episode. If fans hate it, it's bad, and I hate it too." So, going by his statement and being that he hates just 2 episodes, we can assume that the fans also hated just 2 episodes, right? That would be a wrong assumption, though. So, which are his favorite episodes, you might ask? Harmon found it quite challenging to respond to this. After all, Rick and Morty is loaded with too many awesome episodes to count, which is why he was able to name a few titles before the end of his interview. We've already spoken about Harmon hates the episode the fans hate, which means he probably enjoys the Rick and Morty episodes that fans find to be the finest. The ultra-dark Ricklantis Mix-Up, which is the spoof title for Tales from the Citadel, and the action-packed zany adventure Pickle Rick from Season 3 are among his very best Rick and Morty episodes. Harmon said of the episodes, and I quote, "I watched those 2 with a crowd of 200 fans, so I know they're good episodes. I'd know they were a piece of garbage if they booed or remained silent at the end. No matter how hard I worked on an episode, if the viewers dislike it, I will too." Harmon also says he enjoyed episode 9 from season 1. It's not just a fantastic episode, he continues, but it also exemplifies the potential and distinctiveness of the show. Co-creator Justin Roiland and I had discussed doing that episode idea, where they reject everything of reality and Rick shows that you can just reboot. Instead, we decided to jump every shark imaginable and move it up so early in the season that it feels creatively suicidal, and in its best moments, Rick and Morty had that as its pulse. Another episode Dan Harmon claims to love so much is Autoerotic Assimilation. This episode is from season 2, and it just so happens it's a fan favorite as well. Another episode Harmon loves is Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, although he also stated that he loves most of the episodes and that picking a favorite would almost be impossible.
Any leads on the vampire?
No, Summer. I mean, I think it might be time that we just let it go.
Although he quickly reminded the interviewer that his least favorite episode is still Raising Gazorpazorp from season 1. I was so pleased with myself while I was writing it, but when I read comments about it, I realized that the points it made about gender were dated and 80s. Now that I detest it, I want it to burn to death. However, that is due to how others react, else I would adore it. Season 7 of Rick and Morty hasn't officially set a return date, but we can be sure that new episodes will premiere in 2023. Even co-creator Dan Harmon, who has been accustomed to the tremendous delays this fandom has experienced, expressed astonishment when he told The Wrap earlier this year that regular installments will now be released annually. And that's all the Rick and Morty episodes that Dan Harmon hates.